The second my wife asked me to sit down, I knew she had something important to say. Not because I had any special intuition or anything, but because I'd seen her do this kind of thing before. It was in the forced casual smile she gave me, the way she nervously brushed her hair aside, and that restless energy just below the surface. I'd seen it enough times to know she was about to tell me something she thought I wouldn't like. I leaned back comfortably, placing my beer on the table and waiting for her to speak. She started softly with a voice that seemed a bit too rehearsed. Look, I've been thinking a lot about us lately. That was the typical opening line to justify something I was sure I wouldn't enjoy hearing. I kept my expression neutral, nodding slightly for her to continue. She reached over and lightly touched my hand. I really do love you, she went on. That was my cue. Whatever this was, she didn't plan on ending our marriage. That wasn't the issue. This was going to be something different, something even worse. But lately I've felt I might need to experience other things, she said, tapping nervously at the table. Meet new people, have new connections. I gave her no reaction, just quietly took another sip of beer and let the tension hang until I finally spoke up. So, what exactly are you getting at? She visibly relaxed, probably relieved I didn't immediately shut her down. She lowered her voice, watching my face carefully. I want to open up our marriage, not because I don't love you. It's just that it might help us grow, you know? In the end, maybe we'd be even stronger. I could tell she'd thought a lot about this and somehow convinced herself this was progressive or healthy, assuming I'd agree and sit patiently while she went off with other guys, keeping me conveniently at home in case things didn't work out. But that wasn't something I was willing to entertain. I cocked my head slightly. You mean you want to date other guys? She hesitated but finally nodded. Yes, but I'm not looking to replace you. I stopped her with a raised hand, interrupting the excuses that were sure to follow. Fine, I said casually. Her eyes opened wide in shock. Fine. Yeah, I shrugged. If you want to meet other men, no problem. But I suppose that means I should see other women too, for comparison. Her face suddenly went pale. Wait, what do you mean? She asked quietly. I leaned in a little. I mean, if you're out there meeting new people, it's only fair that I do the same. Then I can figure out how you stack up against other women. She winced, and it was clear she'd never considered this side of it. She'd imagined I'd quietly accept whatever terms she laid down, staying faithfully at home, ready to welcome her back whenever she felt bored with other men. But I just shattered that neat little fantasy. You're going to compare me? She asked, sounding genuinely insecure for the first time in ages. I nodded casually. Of course, how else would I know I'm getting the best deal possible? Her jaw tightened slightly, but she quickly forced a smile. It's not supposed to be like that, she said nervously. It's not a competition. I shrugged again. Isn't it? You're telling me you want to find out if there's something better out there. That means there's obviously some sort of comparison involved. If you're checking how I measure up against other men, then it's only fair I do the same with women. She stared at me, clearly unsettled. I don't want you to be with other women, she admitted quietly. I smiled slightly. Why not? Because that's not what this is about, she insisted quickly, fumbling for words. I just want to have different experiences, but our relationship should stay the same. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. You want permission to sleep around while expecting me to stay exactly as I am? She swallowed hard. It's not just about sex. Of course it is, I answered bluntly. You wouldn't even suggest it if there wasn't someone else already in your head. That struck a nerve. Her face paled for an instant before she recovered herself. That's not true. I leaned in closer. Who is he? She froze. What? I tilted my head slightly. You're not bringing this up just because you might want to explore. You're saying this because you already have someone lined up. So who is it? She bit her lip again, a nervous habit she couldn't hide. That's unfair. Life is unfair, I told her, standing up slowly. You thought you could set the rules. Turns out you're not a fan when they apply to you too. She shot up quickly from her chair, eyes flashing with frustration. This isn't what I meant, she said angrily. I just smirked. She crossed her arms defensively. Really, you're just going to toss aside everything we've built because I brought up an honest discussion? I let her words linger in the air for a moment before replying calmly. I'm not throwing anything away. You already did. Her sharp intake of breath showed that she understood exactly what I meant. The realization was hitting her now. She wasn't in charge like she'd imagined. The script she had carefully written was slipping away. The silence that followed was heavy, tight with unspoken tension. My wife's face stayed carefully neutral, but the grip she had on her glass tightened noticeably. Her composure was slipping fast, leaving her clearly rattled. She'd assumed she could neatly control the terms, that I'd just nod and agree to her idea of an open relationship. But my casual suggestion that I'd do the same thing had completely shifted the dynamic, leaving her scrambling to regain control. I watched closely as she struggled internally, uncertain how to respond. "Why are you making this so difficult?" she finally asked, her voice controlled but strained. This was never about replacing each other. It's just about experiencing new things. Leaning back, I swirled the last few drops of beer around the bottle. "Yeah, I understand completely," I replied easily. "And you know what? Maybe I've been narrow-minded about this. I probably should explore my options too, just to fully appreciate what I've already got here at home." Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again, clearly at a loss. "That's different," she argued weakly. "How is it different?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I just don't want to risk losing us." I laughed openly at that, a genuine laugh that made her visibly flinch. "Risk? You're the one who opened that door. You put what we have on the line. I'm just agreeing to play by your rules. Why should you be the only one allowed to check if there's something better?" Her face paled even more as my words sank in, her confidence visibly fracturing. For the first time in a long time, she looked unsure. In the days following our conversation, something noticeably shifted. She started being more affectionate, lingering a little longer with her hugs, her kisses more deliberate. She began returning home early, something she hadn't done in ages. And even her wardrobe changed subtly, becoming less flashy, more modest. I pretended not to notice. The cracks became more visible one evening when she caught me lounging on the couch, casually scrolling through my phone. "Who are you texting?" she asked cautiously. I raised an eyebrow at her. "Why does it matter?" She hesitated. "I'm just curious." "Just a friend," I answered, smirking slightly. "Afraid I'm making comparisons?" She tensed visibly, her breath hitching. I could practically see the internal battle playing out on her face. She'd counted on me, begging her to reconsider, pleading to hold on to her. But instead, I was matching her at her own game, and it scared her. Later that night, she tried to start something intimate, clearly attempting to reclaim a sense of control, but I gently turned her down. Her stunned reaction was worth it. "But you always want to," she said, sitting up confused. "Not tonight," I said simply. She didn't sleep well after that. I already knew the truth behind her suggestion. It wasn't random. There was someone else, already lined up. People don't just suggest open relationships out of nowhere. She'd been planning this, testing the waters. So naturally, I started digging. She wasn't as careful as she thought, leaving enough clues behind. A couple of password resets, some location checks, and the assistance of a helpful friend a night later. And I had my answer: John, a single coworker, slightly older, someone I'd briefly met at her company events. We'd even shaken hands and exchanged small talk. Meanwhile, he'd probably already been imagining being with my wife. It made my blood boil beneath the surface, but I swallowed my anger. This wasn't about losing my temper. It was about reclaiming control. I kept quiet, not confronting her yet. Instead, I let her think I was fully participating in her game, giving her just enough rope to trip herself up. A week later, I casually mentioned plans one evening. "Plans?" she repeated, stirring her coffee quickly. "Yeah," I said calmly. "Just meeting up for drinks. A friend wanted to introduce me to someone." Her spoon clinked sharply against her mug. "You're going on a date?" I smiled lightly. "Not exactly. Just checking what's out there." She swallowed visibly, eyes darting as she tried to calculate her next move. Clearly, she'd never anticipated I'd actually take her suggestions seriously, especially not in a way that might favor me. That evening, I walked out the door without a backward glance. There was nobody I planned to meet, but she didn't need to know that. When I came home, she was wide awake, obviously waiting. "So how was your night?" she asked, trying to sound relaxed but failing miserably. "Fine," I replied casually. Her hand clenched tightly around the couch cushion. "Did you meet anyone?" she finally blurted, unable to keep her curiosity hidden. I slowly smiled. "Why do you want to know?" She started to say something, then quickly stopped herself. For the first time since this mess began, she felt what I'd been feeling: uncertainty. And just like that, our roles had shifted entirely. Over the next several days, the tension in our home thickened. She texted me constantly, asking where I was or what I was up to. She cooked meals she knew I'd love, wore that perfume that always drove me crazy, but I never gave her the reaction she was clearly craving. I allowed her to simmer in that anxious feeling. Our marriage had changed dramatically. She had assumed she'd set the stage, controlled the narrative, but now she could feel it slipping through her fingers. And I wasn't about to rescue her. Not yet. Something about her was different now. The arrogance and self-assurance were gone, replaced by a quiet desperation that she tried to mask with awkward smiles and overly affectionate gestures. But I could see straight through it. Every touch, every lingering glance was fueled by fear. Not the fear of losing me exactly, but fear of losing control. For weeks, she'd imagined I'd quietly wait in the background while she experimented, obediently playing the good husband at home. But now she believed I was the one doing the exploring, and it was tearing her apart. The first clear crack came during dinner one night. She'd gone all out, home-cooked dinner, candles, the fancy wine we'd been saving. I acted oblivious, eating casually. Finally, she couldn't hold back. "So," she said, twirling her fork nervously, "who is she?" I looked up, pretending to be confused. "Who?" She forced a laugh that sounded painfully fake. "Come on, the woman you've been texting, the one you went out with the other night." A slow smirk spread across my face. "Does it matter?" Her fingers tightened around the fork. "I just think it's ridiculous that you're—" She stopped herself, exhaling sharply. "We should be careful about this whole thing." "This whole thing?" I echoed calmly. "You know exactly what I mean," she replied, avoiding my eyes. "We don't want to regret any hasty decisions." I leaned back comfortably, watching her discomfort. "You mean decisions like opening our marriage?" She flinched. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly, voice shaky. "I just think maybe we rushed this." There it was, the first sign she wanted to take it back. But I wasn't going to make it easy. The next day, I learned her secret guy, John, was starting to panic. My phone rang from a blocked number several times before I finally answered. "Hello?" Silence at first. Then a familiar voice, tense and cautious. "We need to talk." "John," I said calmly, smirking. "Yeah, we do." He exhaled heavily. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" "That you knew," he said quietly. "She told me things were complicated between you guys. I didn't—" "Stop!" I cut him off sharply. He fell silent. "Doesn't matter what she told you. The only thing that matters is what's happening right now, and right now, she's realizing she screwed up." Another shaky breath. "Are you going to tell her you know?" I laughed softly. "What do you think?" More silence. Oh, then he muttered anxiously. "She's been acting weird lately. Distant, jumpy. I think she's second-guessing it." Of course she was. "Not my problem," I said. "I just don't want this blowing back on me," he confessed, clearly worried about himself more than anything else. "I guess we'll see," I said coldly, and hung up. That night, she finally cracked. I was lounging on the couch pretending to text someone when she stormed into the room, furious. "Who is she?" Who is she?" she demanded sharply. I didn't even glance up. "What?" She yanked my phone from my grip, her eyes blazing. "You heard me. Who have you been seeing?" I leaned back calmly, watching her desperately scroll through my empty messages. Of course, there was nothing to find. I hadn't actually been texting anyone, but that wasn't really the point. She was falling apart right in front of me. "You hate this feeling, don't you?" I said thoughtfully. She lifted her gaze, eyes flickering between anger and confusion. "What do you mean?" I stood up slowly, looking down at her. The uncertainty, the doubts creeping in, the fear that maybe you're not as special as you believed. She swallowed nervously. "You had no issues when you thought I'd quietly put up with your little adventures," I added. "But now that things are reversed, you're struggling to cope." She took a shaky breath. I leaned closer. "Honestly, was an open relationship ever your plan? Or were you just looking for a guilt-free way to cheat?" Her lips opened slightly, but no answer followed. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. The last move." I let her live with her anxiety for a couple more days before finally ending it. When she came home from work, an envelope was waiting on the kitchen counter. Inside was everything. Every message exchanged with John, every hotel booking, every call recorded, and a prepared separation document. She walked into the living room, clutching the envelope, her hands trembling. "You knew?" she whispered. I calmly took a drink, placing the glass back down. "Of course I knew." Her eyes filled with tears. "How long have you known?" I shrugged casually. Long enough. She inhaled deeply. What's next? I let out a slow breath. You decide. Sign the papers and leave with some dignity, or make things worse by fighting me on this. Her face twisted in anguish. I don't want to lose you, I laughed bitterly. Funny, you didn't seem concerned about losing me while you were with him. She began sobbing, but it didn't affect me. She'd thought I'd accept second place, but instead I showed her she'd never even been first. She stood there, gripping that envelope, her knuckles turning white as she stared at the evidence inside. Her face drained of color, trembling from shock and the heavy realization. She'd lost. Her little fantasy had crumbled, leaving no escape. Her lips shook when she finally spoke. I can fix this. I almost laughed out loud. Fix what, exactly? She swallowed, desperation coloring her voice. Us. Us? I repeated, eyebrow raised. You mean the us you threw away for John? The same us you weren't thinking about when planning your little adventure? Her breath caught. I wasn't replacing you. No, you just wanted me as your backup, waiting around in case things didn't work out, I said plainly. You needed a safety net. You wanted the freedom to explore without consequences, knowing I'd still be here. Her silence told me everything I needed. She expected me to beg, to plead and chase her. Instead, I let her face the consequences alone. One last attempt. She tried again, her voice softened, that old warmth creeping back. I was an idiot. I realize that now. I don't want anyone but you. I shook my head firmly. No, you don't get to say that now. Tears spilled down her face. Why not? Because, I said coldly, you weren't saying that until you understood you weren't irreplaceable. A sob escaped her throat. I interrupted her. You made your choice. Now deal with it. Alone. She broke then, collapsing into a chair, crying uncontrollably. She never imagined it would come to this. She believed she had control, that I'd always be there, holding on to us, no matter what she did. She was dead wrong. Now reality was hitting hard. Her partner was unraveling too. As I expected, she wasn't the only one panicking. John was also desperate. The next morning, another call came through. Man, I swear, I didn't intend for any of this, John blurted out as soon as I picked up. She told me you were fine with opening things up, that you'd agreed. I laughed. You really trusted a married woman trying to justify cheating on her husband? Silence hung between us. I didn't expect her to break down like this, he admitted, voice tight. She came to my place crying last night, saying you're divorcing her and blaming me. I smiled slightly. And I can't afford this mess. His voice cracked anxiously. I have a reputation. We work together. If this leaks out, I cut him off. Maybe you should have thought about that before sleeping with someone else's wife. He breathed out shakily. Look, I don't want trouble. Can't we reach some kind of arrangement? Maybe reconsider separating? Maybe. I hung up. The final blow. Later that day, I handed my wife the official separation papers. She stared blankly at the papers, fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through them. I don't want this, she whispered softly. I leaned back calmly. It's not your choice anymore. She had asked for choices when she proposed opening our marriage, and now she had none left. Her voice cracked. I can't do this without you. I tilted my head, observing her carefully. Funny, you seemed confident you could manage just fine without me before. A painful sob broke from her. Please, give us another chance. I'll end things with John. I'll prove I still love you. I smiled bitterly. You've already proven exactly where we stand. She drew a shaky breath. You assumed you held all the power, I went on calmly. That I'd be too weak or desperate to leave. That I'd patiently wait around until you decided if I was worth keeping. Her eyes squeezed shut in pain. But guess what? I said quietly. I already made the choice for you. She crumbled. She finally understood it was truly over. Her control had vanished completely. She'd spent all that time assessing my value, comparing me to others, never once realizing I could do the exact same thing. Now she had to face the truth she'd never imagined. She didn't measure up. The aftermath followed quickly. I proceeded with the separation. She tried desperately to stall, to fix things somehow, but it was far too late. I wasn't interested in playing along anymore. She lost more than just our relationship. John distanced himself immediately, unwilling to face further consequences. She lost the home, stability, and security she'd always assumed would be there. She wanted freedom to explore. Now she had no choice but to live with her decisions. And me? I moved forward.